So my name is Josephine Gray, and I'm a co-founder and currently the president of the St. Jamestown Community Cooperative. And we started in about 2012 to try to figure out how to help our very, very diverse community of newcomers and immigrants and vulnerable people in very densely populated neighborhood in downtown Toronto, in St. Jamestown. We were trying to figure out how to increase and improve healthy food security. So there were a lot of discussions, and then we decided that the best way to proceed would be to form a cooperative. So we wanted to make sure that the residents in our community were the member owners of their own initiative, of our own co-op. So we incorporated in 2015, and then we began to work on how, in fact, would a community like ours be able to create a situation where we had full cycle food security. Um, a lot of the people who we were consulting with, our neighbors, our members, a lot of them come from different parts of the world that had a lot of experience with climate chaos, with coming out of war and this and that. So we had a very comprehensive view, many diverse perspectives on what was necessary for food security. And there was quite a lot of attention to the fact that we are a winter country and we have one short growing season. So I think quite a lot of our neighbors from the global south were a bit alarmed by what they saw as Canada's food insecurity problem. So there was a lot of focus on how can we grow healthy food all year round that is appropriate for different cultures, different ethnicities, people from different parts of the world. How could we grow it in such a way that was as organic as possible, as healthy as possible, sustainable as possible? And out of that, out of years of discussion and deliberation, we came up with the Oasis Food Hub model. We got a city grant to do a feasibility and technical study, and in 2018, 2019. So we did that. And along the way, we've done a lot of community meals and a lot of get togethers and gatherings and going out to farms and discussions and sharing knowledge and ideas and building up our organization. So we are, basically it's called a community co-op model, and it allows for individuals, organizations, and businesses to be members. It's a bit unusual that way. It's not exactly a multi-stakeholder, but we wanted it that way because in addition to building up a food hub and trying to get that implemented, we wanted there to be the mandate and opportunity for members to create their own projects, perhaps create social enterprises. So let's say somebody comes up with a wonderful curry sauce, and then it could be, Auntie Una's curry sauce or something. And then we would help to sell Auntie Una's curry sauce through our food hub. So that's why our co-op model is a little unusual, because we have fairly unique circumstances. So over the years, we've gone up and down a bit like a roller coaster. We've had some good years of funding and some years where we struggled. But all along, we maintain our focus on the human right to food. So the whole human right to food, which means affordable, accessible, sustainable, unadulterated, and culturally appropriate. So keeping all those principles in mind and also having concern and care for ecology and the environment, we try to do as best we can all of our activities to be, as eco-conscious as possible. And, we work in a very, very diverse neighborhood. People speak many languages. So that's been an interesting challenge. But we do find that having, human rights as an embedded part of our governance of our co-op's principles has been very helpful in helping people to work together, even though they may come from very different backgrounds, different faiths. They may be, Canadian, sort of very up with the times around things like gender diversity, or they may be, very strict Orthodox people of faith. So having a human rights framework has been very, very important to help people be able to respect each other and work together, even if they don't agree. So it's been an interesting journey. It's our 10th year. It's our 10-year anniversary. And we've managed to finally get some stable space. We used to have to share space and borrow space and book space and all these things. But we now have a nice office with a small kitchen and a food processing space in the basement of one of the Toronto community housing buildings. And, we literally had to change Toronto community housing's policy to be able to get that space, but we have it now. And at this point, we're really looking at how to create digital platforms that are easily accessible to people with different languages, different levels of digital literacy, so that people can order food, exchange knowledge and recipes, help us govern the co-op, give us feedback. We've done a lot of surveying. We've done a lot of design charrettes and consultations and stuff, and we want to have a multilingual platform so that our whole neighborhood can fully participate. Because we find a lot of folks, with English as a second or fourth or fifth language, sometimes understandably struggle to really comprehend what it is that we're doing and what people are saying. So, this is our current focus, is on trying to become as accessible as possible through our website so that people can fully engage and fully understand what's going on. Yeah, so cooperatives, for one, I've always been attracted to the cooperative model for a number of reasons. I really like the co-op principles. The idea of democracy, autonomy, it sort of confers a greater level of sovereignty. In other words, our ability as a community to decide how we want to do things. And at the same time, a co-op, is confers member ownership, not just membership. So it goes beyond, it confers more dignity and more, people can have more of a say than in a nonprofit. We don't want to see ourselves and each other as clients. We know that we have very many highly educated, experienced, wise, intelligent people, and we want them all to have a role and to enjoy the benefits of being part of a cooperative. There is also to ensure that the governance would be community-based and not from external professionals, for example, so that our board, has a requirement that it must be 50% or more residents, that our primary service is to the people in the community. So this was a way of preventing what we've gone through a lot of experience with, having very large agencies come in and do satellite programs in our community, where people really have no say over what's being offered. They have no way of changing or adjusting programs because they don't have any connection to the direction or the design of how things are offered. So we wanted to take a very different approach. And another reason is that, the boards of nonprofits, the people who are responsible for building and governing and maintaining, sustaining organizations, are not allowed in general to benefit or to get any kind of compensation for their work. And in a community like ours, that's a lot to ask. I mean, we have a lot of people who are struggling, who have multiple jobs or are living on very low incomes. And we wanted people to have the option of being able to be part of the governance, taking on that responsibility, but also being able to be paid for their work outside or separate from their board role. So that was another advantage of having a cooperative. And I think too, like, co-ops are a much more familiar kind of model to people from many parts of the world. It's not very well understood in Canada. People tend to think of co-ops as housing co-ops. That's the only thing that they've really heard of, unless they're sort of in the Midwest, where we have quite a lot of agricultural co-ops. But, many parts of the world have a lot of cooperatives. In fact, I'd say about 40% of the economies of the global South are co-op based. So it was much easier for us to engage with people from that perspective to say, this is a co-op, this is something that you're welcome to be a part of. And I think it feels a lot different from, oh, so you're a person who's experiencing hardship, we're a charity, we'll help you, you're a client. We have many people who were highly educated, middle or upper class folks who came here for whatever reason. And they're often not that comfortable with being perceived as or treated as a charity case or somebody who has nothing to offer but only has needs. So for us, a co-op felt a lot more dignified, gave us a lot more, local control. It made sure that we are, by definition, community-based and community-owned. And it's a little unusual for a Toronto organization, but then St. Jamestown is a very unique community. So this was our way of maximizing our ability to engage with our members and our neighbors so that they could feel that, yes, we are providing you with food boxes, but you also are a member of this co-op and you have a role in deciding what goes into those food boxes and what kind of programs we have. So out of this have come lovely things like having eco-farm crews where we organize to take members out to local farms and in some cases work for a whole season with farmers. So they learn to farm in Canada. They learn the ins and outs of, ecological farming as opposed to factory farming, for example, and what it takes to grow food in a winter country. And, we get to talk about and experiment in our community garden with trying to grow different kinds of crops things that people might be more familiar with, like perhaps instead of spinach, we grow callaloo, things like that. So it's been, yeah, at times when we have, the resources to have a good solid group of staff, we've had some really great programs and really great experiences working with our neighbors because of our co-op model. I think the other thing that we really like about the co-op model is that, we are trying to, in addition to feeding our community, we want to help affect change in the food system. We want to help transform the food system. And to be a co-op, by definition, co-ops cooperate with co-ops. So this makes a very big difference as well, because we don't think that the food system is a place for competition, for commodification, for seeking profit. And, being a co-op allows us to be a part of the co-op community. So we have cooperators insurance, for example. The Ontario Co-op Association helped with our development. We were a part of Local Farm and Food Co-op, which is a province-wide second-tier co-op that was working on trying to network between farm and food co-ops to help build a better food system. So all of these memberships and these relationships have been very important to our development and to our being able to exchange information with the broader community, to be able to talk to, for instance, Indigenous people in the far north about the benefits of aquaponics and, all kinds of really interesting projects and exchanges of ideas and information that would be, I think, otherwise almost impossible if we were just part of the nonprofit sector. I think another thing about being a co-op that's so important is having the flexibility, the autonomy, the sovereignty to do things according to our members' needs and according to what is happening in the world around us, so that we're not trapped in a model that requires outcomes that would be contradictory with our principles of human rights, of serving member needs. There isn't another kind of organizational model that is so capable of reflecting and supporting and being grounded in human rights. So that's very, very important to us and to me, particularly in such a diverse community. And, if we were a corporation, then we have to pursue profit at all costs. And if we were a nonprofit, we would have quite a few limitations and restrictions, say, if we were a charity, for example, where we wouldn't be able to run social enterprise and perhaps earn money, or there's so many more things that we can do as a cooperative because of that sovereignty aspect that is so important. And I think too, once people start to understand the benefits of co-ops and they see how co-ops are often more enduring business models because they tend to weather economic disruptions and shocks better than most kinds of business models do. And it's a little known fact that cooperatives actually precede the current corporation definition model. So, and we can see like Gay Lee Dairy is a huge cooperative that many people don't realize when they go to buy butter or milk at the store. And Gay Lee is, in fact, this enormous co-op that's been going for many, many, many decades and involves dairy farmers all across Ontario. And, they have a wonderful center where they do co-op education. And that's the beauty of the co-op community is in how many ways we engage and support each other. We only bank, of course, with the credit unions. And it's another piece of it. I much prefer to have our financial management and our banking be done within a credit union or cooperative because there's far more understanding and recognition of what it is our banking needs are and stuff. So yeah, there's just so many good reasons for it. So, we are in a very complicated, vulnerable, at-risk neighborhood. Um, During COVID, it was actually declared as an emergency zone. We have a lot of people with multiple health issues. There's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of suffering. And yet we're not a neighborhood improvement area. We have never really been on anybody's radar, partly because we are so full of newcomers. So, we haven't been able to build up a large body of people with a loud voice over the years. And I think also sometimes uh, agencies or funders look at our community and they think, for one thing, we're close to Regent Park and Regent Park gets all kinds of funding and support. So they think we should just get those services. But it's actually kind of far and we're not even in the catchment area. So we sort of seem to be a bit under the radar. We have a lot of private landlords, big private landlords, as well as social housing. So most social housing communities are, um, they get a lot of attention and support, but we're just 4 buildings out of 20 that are social housing. So there's a lot of reasons I think that help to keep us quite isolated and underserved. And for that very same reason as co-op and being slightly unique also form of organization in a unique neighborhood, I think sometimes that disadvantages us and trying to compete for various forms of funding or government support. So it's sort of like I said, it's been up and down. And like, there'd be one period of time when we have some sympathetic politicians and we make some progress and we get some traction and it's looking good. And then that politician is gone, they get voted out, and then we have to start over again. And the next person that came in, maybe they don't care. They don't think that what we're doing is important. And for quite some time also, like just even saying that there was hunger that we had, and like talking about the bigger issues of the food system just wasn't very well received. It was sort of like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Because it wasn't the experience of a lot of people in Canada or in Toronto. So that was difficult. As things have changed and climate chaos has become more apparent, and people have begun to understand that we do, in fact, have food security issues. And now Toronto has been named as having an emergency. The focus then, though, has been very much on charity and on food banks. And we are not doing that. We want to go beyond that. We want to make sure that our families have healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate food. And sometimes, we get this feedback that our food hub model or our grant ask is ambitious, or it's a little outside the lines because it's not as conventional, it's not as familiar. So it's been a bit difficult. Just in the last couple of years, we had this moment where a large granting organization gave us a 3-year grant, but they had, and it was quite discretionary, um, which was great. We went in there with a social enterprise development partner. That was part of how we think we were able to qualify for this particular large grant. But they had metrics, they had to target. And the problem was that um, the space that we required in order to be able to meet the target was delayed by 8 months. And by the time we actually got access to the space, we didn't have time to catch up because we needed to be able to pack 3 food hampers a month for over 200 households in order to meet the target. And we couldn't do it with the small office that we had. And I kept trying to say, we're going to need to change the deadline on this target because we don't have the space. But they don't seem to comprehend the literal logistical limits of what we could do. Between that and the social enterprise partner who clearly didn't really understand the reality of how to engage our Good Food Club, how to engage residents in the Good Food Club model that we were building, where they would pay part of the expense of the food hampers and we would cover part of the expense. But this social enterprise partner was very, very business minded and was trying to push a very sort of business focused approach, which was very inappropriate for a lot of our members. And between those two factors, we failed to meet the target, and they withdrew $600,000 worth of funding, which was a very large blow. And one of the problems with that too was that there was lots of fanfare about us getting this grant, and they also neglected to take down the information from their website saying that we had $1 million. Until almost a year later, I didn't even see it until I was looking for some other reason. I was like, no wonder we're not getting any grants because people they look up our co-op on the web and they think we have $1 million when we don't. So that's been a challenge recently. I think also the fact that, and this was what the disappointing part of this whole thing was that, this funding was negotiated over months and months. And part of the rationale was that we were resident run and that we were genuine, authentically community based. So this was supposed to be such a big plus, but then they didn't seem to recognize or understand that that also might come with real world challenges, right? But that same factor of being resident run and, being managed and controlled by, people of color for the most part, women of color for the most part, it seems to sort of keep us boxed in a sort of lower funding, a lower funding tier in terms of, they're willing to give groups like ours little bits of money to do things, but they expect us all to volunteer. And I personally, I object. I want the people who are doing the work in our co-op to be well paid. I want them to have stable jobs. So I've fought hard for that kind of funding. And when we've had it, it works very well. And when we don't, it's very difficult. And it's really hard when you're a co-op and when you have these principles, it's very difficult to, rally and push people to voluntarily do a lot of work when they're already struggling. So, it's kind of a catch-22, right? And, we pay for our principles, I guess. We're paying for our integrity, but it's kind of hard to give it up at the same time because, there are large organizations and agencies that get quite substantial funding to do things in our neighborhood. And they make a lot of noise about what they're doing. But unfortunately, these programs rarely last. They don't last. They come and go. And people are left in the end with a big distrust of organizations. They feel that they've been duped, they've been used. And we just refuse to do that. So it makes it a little more difficult. And also when you're running a cooperative, you want your people to be fully informed, to be fully aware, to be making well-informed decisions. And when you're trying to do this in a environment, whereas some of what we're actually focusing on and talking about is not well understood, like how to organize initiatives in a very diverse multilingual community that's not well understood. How to work with people who are, multi-generational households, and they are constantly expecting you to tick off boxes that limit you to this one demographic. You only can serve youth, or you can only do these, and you can only do that. Well, it's very difficult for us to do that because we work with a lot of cultures that are far more family oriented than that. And it's very difficult also for us to say, oh, we're only going to serve people of this ethnicity or this gender, because we are a human rights-based organization. So for us to fit the criteria is often a big challenge. And then because what we're doing is often unique, it's innovative, it's many times it's sort of ahead of the curve in a sense. Yeah, it's not always well received, but I suppose, if we were some Mars Institute, with all sorts of academics and degrees and PhDs and do, well, maybe then they would listen to the solutions that we've devised. But because we're, a bunch of mostly low income brown people, they're like, yeah, whatever, sounds great. But, you guys couldn't possibly do that. So we're not going to entrust you with the kinds of resources and money and space that would be necessary. So that's the hard reality of what we're up against. And, Canada's subtle, rarely spoken systemic racism definitely has an impact on our well-being as an organization. I think one of the things that I'm hoping is starting to gain a little bit of traction and momentum is to recognize that, well, first of all, our whole philosophy and model of food system transformation and local food security is very much grounded in an awareness of climate chaos and looking at it from a climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience perspective. And I think there's now gradually more and more understanding that, food system transformation is very much climate action focused. So there's more understanding of that. So I think that's helpful. And I think also, a lots of advocacy has gone on where there's growing recognition of the importance of being inclusive, of people of color, of Black leadership, things like that. So there's a little bit more opportunity because of those things. And, we're just trying to navigate that terrain. But again, it tends to be that, okay, so we recognize that, Black people, for the sake of equity, should have more investment, but then, the amount that they'll offer is very narrow. And then we're also saying, well, our Black community is incredibly diverse, and so it has to be multilingual. And that's a little out of the box for some people to understand that. Like, I don't know that many people realize that, Black people in Ontario come from 150 countries. So when you say Black food sovereignty, what are we talking about? There's not one culture of food within the African diaspora. Or what if you're mixed? What if you're Afro-Indigenous? What if you're like myself, or you're part white and part Black? Like, where do we fit into this picture? So yeah, I mean, I feel like with the growing awareness of the importance of local food security, that it's almost as if circumstances have caught up with our vision, and people's understanding is becoming more aligned with the solutions that we're proposing. So I haven't given up hope. I'm starting to have some, I think, positive conversations with some of the larger actors in the sort of food system field, folks who are starting to, more appreciate and more value what we're trying to do. And perhaps also we've been at it for long enough that we'll be taken seriously. We are also part of we're a community partner in a major research grant. It's funded by the federal government about urban agriculture and greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of interesting information coming out of that. And I think part of the problem we had with selling the idea of our model is that there wasn't a lot of Canadian-based research evidence, and everybody's all about evidence-based policy, right? So there wasn't a lot of Canadian data or Toronto GTA area data that we could point to say that no, actually, we really do need to be able to grow food all year round, and that we do need to be able to repurpose indoor spaces in order to grow food, and that having a little community garden, especially one that's in a not very clean or healthy area, is not a food security response, and that food banks don't actually serve many of the people in any given community because of different dietary needs, because of different cultural needs, and that food banks themselves are not a sustainable model. And that's now all of this understanding is starting to surface. So I feel like as we get more evidence, as we see more broader understanding of the challenges that we're facing, as the sort of mainstream narrative starts to encompass recognition that large scale corporate factory farming is not sustainable, food banks are not sustainable, like the various things that have been the standard models are no longer have the power that they had. Yeah, maybe just perseverance will pay off and we'll be able to get some support. The other thing I'm hoping people start to recognize and understand is as we are, increasingly in a world with global challenges where people need to be able to interact across borders and communicate, not just for the sake of a food system, but for climate solutions and things like that. Surely they hopefully will soon see the advantage of developing a full cycle climate resilient food hub in a very diverse multilingual neighborhood where we can communicate about the solutions that we are co-creating with many other parts of the world in their own language. We can literally reach into many, many countries and know who to speak to and how to contact and how to be sharing the knowledge and the information, and also exchanging knowledge and information with people in other parts of the world, because often there are, amazing technological solutions being tried in places like Singapore or Netherlands or Africa or South America that we could all benefit from. So the more we have this ability to, co-op to co-op or community to community, to be able to communicate in multiple languages, hopefully it starts to be understood that we should be taking advantage of the fact that Toronto is the most diverse city in the world and that our neighborhood is the most diverse neighborhood potentially in the world. And that should be seen as a major advantage in promoting Canada's ability to be a leader in green tech and climate solutions and clean tech and healthy food security and things like that. We just have to be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more willing to support and take the risk of doing real meaningful innovation. Yeah, I think I didn't mention that, we're currently, partly because of our work, there's more food donations and such coming into the community than there was. You know, we we have not been able to continue to distribute a lot of food. But what we are very much focused on at this point are the tools and pathways for food system transformation, for food distribution, for engaging with farmers, for community assisted agriculture, for things like that. It really requires digital infrastructure. And we've partnered with some very, very brilliant minds, both within our community and outside our community, who have been doing some really great work on these things. So we now have, a wonderful farm partner leader and a blockchain coding developer, and we're looking at ways in which we can combine time banking with seed to table tracking protocols with AI so that we are actually able to support rapid networking and innovation and development in transforming the food system and being able to support local farmers and food producers, being able to connect and network food organizations, co-ops, whoever they are, with communities, with food hubs, with food banks. We need to have a solid, secure digital infrastructure in order to be able to make all of that happen. So based on all of our learnings and the way in which we approach food system transformation, I think we are on the cusp of being able to create a toolkit or a set of platform and a manual that will really help for a lot of communities and farmers and neighborhoods, both here and even abroad, like with people you want to trade with in the Caribbean and the like, to be able to interact and trade and exchange and network. And like that's something that we're hyper focused on right now. And we have a very solid proposals around how to accomplish that. And in addition to that, we're looking at energy efficiency and green tech, and looking for venture capitalist investors and funding to support that kind of research and development. So, we'll see where that goes. And I don't know, maybe because we've just got such solid technology concepts and some solid technology developments already. I'm really, really hoping that we'll be able to bring this into fruition and share it with others so that we can build out our food system. Because honestly, people need to be very aware that Toronto is not food secure, but it is the meeting place of peoples from around the world. And we have a really heavy obligation to be able to keep our communities and our families and our residents healthy. And we can do that if we work together and if we work quickly. And if cities, governments, provincial and federal governments start to understand that they need to look at the food system as a whole, and start working directly with communities, with farmers, with food producers. If we can get together in like round tables where all the stakeholders are present and really look at how to make this system work, we know that we have a lot of really great solutions that we've both collected and also invented that we can pull together and make it happen. But it's important for people to realize how close we are, how perilously close we are to having a hunger crisis. Not only do we already have an emergency, but our major food terminal, our whole distribution system sits in a floodplain. That's not smart. We have some really serious vulnerabilities, and our food supply lines are far too long, they're far too stretched out, and they're far too fragile. So my hope is that as people start recognizing the urgency of the situation, they'll be much more open to setting aside their prejudices and their standard conventional ways of approaching things, and be able to really pull together to cooperate, because we need the civil service, we need civil society, we need politicians, we need farmers, we need people to actually be able to work together if we're going to solve this problem. And if they don't, food riots are not nice. This is not something that we want to experience in this city ever. And that's my prayer, that we were able to implement solutions before we reach the point of absolute crisis where we have people dying of hunger and people having food riots. So that's my hope, is that we'll get there before that happens.